Hello and welcome to episode 63 of the Epic Classroom Podcast. I'm Trevor Muir, and this is where we explore how to make learning meaningful, dynamic, and transformative. Epic. So students don't just get through school, they thrive because of it. All right. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. It is October 1st as I record this right now. And so we are just starting to get our rhythm, aren't we, in this school year? It's been maybe a month or two in the classroom, and hopefully you're finding some rhythms and routines, and you've built some relationships and connected with students, and it's starting to become a little bit easier. But then this is also the time of the year where some of that early school year excitement begins to wear off, which can come with its own set of challenges. And so maybe next week we'll do a podcast on hitting that October wall and what happens when all that energy from the beginning of the year starts to wear off and you're hit with some of the realities or some of the complacency that sets in this time of year. So we'll do that either next week or the week following. But today I want to tell you about a survey I came across recently, put out by the Walton Foundation and Gallup Polling. So what they did is they surveyed over 4,000 high school students asking this question: when have you been very excited about or interested in what you learned in school? And why did you feel interested or excited? Now, the lowest response they got, only 4% of those surveyed said that they've never felt interested or excited in school. So 4%. Now, that's still too many kids, but honestly, I was expecting that number to be higher. Mostly because sometimes we can all be a little dramatic, because I'm a little skeptical about anybody never having any interest in what they learned in school. But anyway, 4% of students felt strong enough to say they've never felt interested or excited in school. But what about the rest of the students? What actually gets them excited? Well, the two most common answers tied for first place. Number one, the topic was something I wanted to learn more about. And number two, the teacher made it exciting and interesting. That's the magic combination right there, right? On one hand, you've got intrinsic motivation, that natural God-given curiosity to want to learn more. And on the other hand, you've got this teacher's creativity and passion at play, right? Teachers are creating ways for their students to engage. That's artwork, that's creativity. And you also have something psychologists call emotional contagion. It's this neurological phenomenon where a teacher's passion actually becomes their student's passion, right? Those are the things that get students excited or interested in school. And we've all seen this in action, right? When you as an educator take material that might look dull on paper or, let's be honest, feels kind of boring at first, and you breathe life into it, you make it meaningful, you show students how knowing this information makes them better and smarter and more capable people. And when you do that, you don't just get compliance, you spark excitement, you generate interest. You know, I'll give you an example from my own life. I had a teacher named Mrs. Perry who just loved Shakespeare. And when I say loved it, Mrs. Perry geeked out over it. I remember one time we did this whole unit on the context and times of Shakespeare, really learning about the world Shakespeare wrote and performed in while we were also reading and acting out some of his works. And Mrs. Perry didn't just lecture about this, she became it. She came into class one time dressed as an Elizabethan playgoer, and she spoke in Old English, and she was absolutely into it. And you know what we thought as students? We thought it was completely ridiculous, but we also loved it. We laughed, we leaned in, and we got curious. And because of that, I started liking Shakespeare a lot more than I ever thought I would. You know, that's what great teaching does. That's the power of passion and creativity mixed with inciting my curiosity. It's all contagious. And it makes me wonder, what if more classrooms operated this way? What if more lessons sparked the natural curiosity and matched it with contagious passion? Because here's the truth. Students don't just remember the content. They remember how they felt learning it. And when those feelings are positive, when they're excited and curious and engaged, that learning sticks. And so my challenge to you this week is think about one lesson, one unit, one piece of content that you teach that just doesn't light you up, right? That doesn't get you excited, that you don't usually see students that interested about? What is that one piece of content? And then I want you to ask yourself, how could I bring a little bit more of my passion into this? How can I get my students curious about this? How can I get them excited about what they're learning in the classroom during that lesson, during that unit? So there's a lot of different ways to answer that question, but I wanted to give you a few of my favorite ways to answer and spark excitement in your lessons. And the first one starts with the power of story. I mean, I talk about it a lot, and that's really what the word epic means, is story. So whenever I say epic, I don't mean big and fun necessarily. What I really mean by epic is that good learning is a good story that we remember. And also, when we tell good stories, it engages students at a deeper level. Our brains are wired for stories. A good story grabs students' attention in a way that raw information just doesn't. I've talked about it before on the podcast, but there's this phenomenon that these researchers at Princeton discovered called neural coupling. And what they found is that when you hear a well-told story, your brain actually mirrors the brain of the storyteller. It actually fires in the same regions and has the same type of chemical reactions as the storyteller. For all intents and purposes, your brain doesn't know that you aren't actually in that story. It's mirroring the brain of the storyteller. It actually thinks it's in that moment. It releases dopamine when you have these good parts of the story that feel good. It releases cortisol, the stress hormone, when there's suspense and the characters are under duress. When your brain is connected with the characters in a story, when you care about their outcome, even if they're fictional, your brain releases oxytocin. That's the love hormone. And when these three hormones mix together in the bloodstream, this is the chemical makeup of what we know as empathy, right? Stories are powerful. They connect with us. And so what if you took that lesson that doesn't necessarily fire you up and you found a way to introduce it with a story, to take advantage of this immense human power, to ignite that neural coupling in your students? What if in science class, before you just launch into talking about ecosystems, you tell the story of how wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone and how it literally changed the rivers in the park, how it literally transformed the ecosystem by placing wolves back in their natural environment. What if you told that story? And if you don't know that story, Google it. It's not hard to find. National Geographic did some really cool stuff on it. But what if you told that story and then started talking about the raw information of ecosystems? In math class, what if before you start talking about ratios, you tell the story of when you totally messed up a recipe because your ratios were off, so students can picture and understand what it looks like, but then also be entertained by your funny story, and then they're going to be grabbed by it, and then they're going to be more open to learning about the content. What if in English you share about a book that shifted your perspective forever? I remember one time I was teaching seniors in high school, and the book that they were reading every year in that class was starting to get stale. And the whole idea about it, of the book that they were reading, was how do we prepare for what's at life after high school? But they were getting stale. And, earlier that year, I read the book East of Eden. And that book just absolutely blew my mind. I loved it so much. And I was like, hey guys, I know you're used to reading this book, or I know you were preparing to read this book, but I've got another book, and I want us to dive into this together. And I want to tell you the story about why I think this book is so special. And I told them the whole story of how it just changed me and how some of those big themes in the book really helped me review my life and my place in my family. And I told them about this. I said, so I want us to read it together. Well, all of a sudden they were a little bit more hooked because this person they looked up to, me, their teacher, was raw and vulnerable and told them a story. And then they were more open to read in that book. And then we read it, and it was so powerful. And by the end of that unit, I actually even got a quote from that book tattooed on my arm, which was uncharacteristic of me because I didn't have any tattoos. But man, did we share a moment. So anyway, there's just this power in sharing stories that can engage students at a deeper level. And so use the power of stories. Take that lesson that you're trying to rework and reformulate and find ways to make it more interesting and engaging, and maybe start it with a story. The next tip is use props or visuals, objects that make an abstract idea tangible to students. Teaching geometry, bring in a basketball. If you're talking about parabola and you're talking about arcs and angles, bring it in a basketball and take shots and help students understand it that way, just by making it visual. Teaching literature, hold up that old beat up book that you've kept since high school and show that to students before going in. There's something about that visual connection, right? Teaching history, hand out newspaper clippings or replica artifacts, something to make it real, something to make it hands-on. One time I was teaching my students about the plague, and we were about to get into the history of the bubonic plague and the Black Death and all those horrible events that happened back in the 1300s specifically for this class. And so before we started the unit, I had a bunch of things sitting on a table that had to do with the plague. There was an old mask, this is pre-COVID, so not the mask that we're all comfortable with or that we understand. But I remember I had like hand sanitizer, a mask, I had like a little toy rat, I had a cup that was full of little black specks that looked like fleas. And I asked students, hey, based on all of these different things that I have here, what do you think we're going to talk about in this next unit? And I let students guess and talk about it. And it was very easy for them to get to the point that we were going to talk something about illness or disease. And I was like, yeah, so we're going to talk about this period of time where this type of thing was really, really prominent and it changed the world. So that's what we're going to do. But it started with visuals. It started with props. It started with this kinesthetic experience. And I know elementary is famous for being more kinesthetic and hands-on in this way, but I'm telling you, even with high schoolers, they want to feel things with their hands. They want to explore. They want life or school to be less abstract and more tangible. So that's just another way of bringing it to life. That's why we all liked, well, maybe not all of us, but it's why a lot of us liked even the gross task of dissecting frogs in science class. It's why we liked making model volcanoes. There's something about the tangible that makes everything else come to light. So that's another one, using props or visuals. The next one is invite student choice, right? There is tons of research that shows that when students are empowered in their learning, when they get to make choices, it actually deepens the learning experience. Choice fuels motivation. And even small choices matter. It's not that students have to dictate what an entire lesson or an entire unit looks like or an entire assignment. Instead, even giving them small choices along the way. So for instance, let's say you're having them write poetry. Instead of saying, all right, I want you to write exactly this prompt, you could say, all right, I want you to write a poem or even small choices matter. Let's say you want students to explain the theme of a story that they read. You could say, all right, you're going to explain the theme to me, and you can do it in a simple paragraph, but you could also write it as a poem to me. You could create a comic strip. You could do some sketchnoting, and you could draw out what you think the theme was, and make sure you involve labels. Here's my rubric. So this is how I'm going to discover whether you have identified what a theme is or not. But how you do that is up to you. Just make sure that you're going for the highest level in the rubric. So make sure that when you create it, you imagine that I'm going to be able to understand what you're saying by looking at whatever it is you create. But whatever you create is up to you. Now, it takes a little practice giving students choices like that, but there's something about them getting to choose that has this power, that gets them more motivated and excited about being there. So invite student choice, right? Like, hey, we're going to read a case study. There's 3 to choose from. Pick the one that you want to read from, right? Here are 2 problems. Which one do you want to solve first? Just little choices can go a long way with students. Then the next step is changing the space in some way. Shifting the physical environment changes the energy in the room. Maybe that's rearranging desks into a circle for class discussion. Instead of having students sitting in rows for when you talk out loud, have them move it into a circle. Have them move it into a horseshoe. Just changing the arrangement of the room can add some excitement and flavor, right? I talk about this a lot and I want to keep talking about it. Take students outside sometimes, even if it's just going out there to read or to write or to make some observations, even if it's only for 10 minutes. There's this power in being outside that students value and that you get to value. Fresh air, vitamin D from the sun, but then also just a change in location. Another thing you can do is just shift up your classroom design every now and then, right? Invite students to have input on what that looks like. Invite them to hang up their artwork on the walls. Shift around posters. If you've ever looked into biophilic design, using natural principles in your classroom, dark shades of green and brown have this calming effect on the human mind. Adding those elements in every now and then, shifting things around, that can go a long way in helping students feel reinvigorated to be in your space. As I said earlier, we're hitting this October wall right now where some of that passionate excitement from the beginning of the year starts to wear out, or it's waning a bit. Maybe now is a good time to change up your physical space, just to give a little bit of a spark to it. It doesn't have to be huge, and you don't have to do it by yourself. Changing the space, you can largely leave up to your students if you'd like. Ask them, hey guys, we're going to shift things around. I need your help with that. Or hey guys, today we're going to be in a big discussion. Help me move the room to a circular design. We're going to circle up for discussion. Then all of a sudden, you're not having to spend all of your planning time doing all the work. You actually have students helping you with it. Next tip, model your curiosity. Let students see your excitement. I said it once and I'll say it again. There is power in vulnerability. Let students know when you are feeling emotional about something as well. Say things like, guys, this blew my mind when I first learned it, and I'm hoping it blows your mind as well, right? Or maybe just wonder out loud about questions that you have that you don't have the answer to. If a student says, what was the theme of that story? Be like, I'm not exactly sure. Like, what do you think it is? Because I think it's probably something powerful because we're all feeling right now. What do you think the theme was? Right? Just letting them know you question and you wonder and you get excited, right? Maybe look something up together in real time. If students are like, hey, what's the rarest songbird in the world? Be like, oh, that's such a good question. Let's go online and look that up for me. Or, hey, Kyle, can you go and look that up for us and then tell us all? It's showing I don't have all the answers, but I'm also curious about it. Curiosity doesn't stop when you get out of school. You can continue to be a curious person throughout your whole life, and I'm going to be that, and I'm going to be that in the classroom alongside you. Some people might see that as a weakness. Why don't I have all the answers? I don't want to let students know that I'm not an expert in everything. But actually, no, the real experts are always curious. They're always wondering. And so let students in on that fact by modeling it. And then lastly, and this is just some of my advice or some of the ideas I have. I'd love to hear what you think helps invite students into engagement and excitement and interest in school. But the one that I think is at the top of the list is connecting what they're learning to their lives in some way, helping students understand the why behind a learning experience. Why is this relevant to you? And I've talked about this a whole bunch. I talked about it 2 weeks ago on the episode about attention span and focus. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, I think it's episode 61. I really encourage you to listen to it because it's compelling. Some of this research I read about why students are losing attention and focus in school and how it doesn't have to do with the rewiring of the brain and their capability of focusing, but it has to do with relevance and them not being able to connect with why they're learning information. And so if we want students to become interested and engaged and even excited about school, we have to help them understand the why, right? Maybe that's helping them understand how it's going to come into their life someday in the real world. Hey guys, we're learning persuasive writing because someday, or maybe now even, you're going to have to make some persuasive arguments about the way the world should be, or the way you should operate in your house, or someday you might advocate to a boss about why you need a raise or a promotion or whatever it is. You're going to need to know how to persuade well, and that's something we can do during this unit is learn the tricks for strong persuasion. We're going to do this in writing together, right? Helping them understand, oh, that's why this is relevant, or historical events. Guys, we're going to learn about World War II because we don't want that to ever happen again. We cannot let bigotry and power to threaten the world and to threaten world peace. And so we need to learn that history so we can prevent it from ever happening again. That's why we're learning this information. Or, hey guys, we're going to learn about addition and subtraction because that is a basic skill you're going to use your whole life. Or we're going to learn about our algebra 1, algebra 2, factoring polynomials, complex math, whatever. We're going to learn that because that strengthens your brain in a way that is irreversible. You are going to be a better problem solver the rest of your life if you can solve this math right now. And that's why we're doing it. Helping them understand the why, or just connecting it to the relevance of their own life, right? Hey guys, we're going to learn about fractions, and we're going to do that by using TikTok views as an example, or slice up pizza in class, and then we're going to eat it all together, but we're going to learn about fractions or pie graphs or whatever by using pizza here, knowing that students like TikTok, or students like pizza, or students like whatever it is, helping make it more relevant and understandable to them, more engaging in that way. So if you notice something here, and all of these, the 6 tips I just gave here, none of these practices require you to completely reinvent your curriculum, right? That's not the call to action. You don't have to throw out the standards or abandon the content. Instead, you're just layering passion and creativity onto what you're already teaching. And when you do that, you're not just teaching material, you're creating an experience. And experiences, that's what students carry with them. So give it a try this week. Pick one lesson that might feel a little flat to you and try one of these practices and see how it changes the energy in the room. Because if a survey of over 4,000 high school students tells us anything, it's this: students want to be excited about learning. And when you combine their natural curiosity with your contagious passion, incredible things can happen. So thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Epic Classroom Podcast. My name is Trevor Muir, and again, I am always honored and thrilled that you are here listening. If you want to check out more of my work, there is an article for all that we've talked about here on my website at trevormuir.com/blog. There is also a video on it. You can find that on my social media at the Epic Classroom on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. And if you just want to follow along even deeper, make sure you are following my email list. You can find a way to sign up for that real easy at my website at trevormuir.com. Thanks again, friends. Looking forward to talking to you next week. Have a great rest of your week teaching or educating or parenting or whatever it is you do to serve students in your community. Talk to you next time.